My name is Danielle Moreau, and I'm 42 years old. For most of my life, I believed that a name was something you inherit, a heavy coat passed down through generations that you're forced to wear, whether it fits or not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The story I'm about to tell you is about the day I learned that a name isn't what you're given, it's what you build. It's about the moment my own family tried to use the good name I had built to tear down everything I stood for, and how, in a packed town hall, I had to choose between being a good daughter and being a good person. Before I dive into how a single town meeting became the final explosive chapter in a long and painful family saga, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you've ever felt the crushing weight of family expectations, go ahead and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. Because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes the hardest battles are fought with the people you're supposed to love the most. To understand what happened in that town hall, you need to understand Harmony Creek. Our town is exactly what it sounds like. Small, quiet, and built on a foundation of interconnected relationships that go back generations. It's the kind of place where your last name is a story, a reputation, and a line of credit all rolled into one. And for a century, the most important name in Harmony Creek was Moreau. Moreau Construction built the town hall, the first bridge over the creek, and half the houses on Main Street, including the one I grew up in. My grandfather, a man of quiet integrity, had built the company on handshakes and honest work. My father, Arthur Moreau, inherited the business, the reputation, and the title of town patriarch. He wore it like a king wears a crown, with a mixture of pride and entitlement. He, along with my uncles Leo and Frank, were the pillars of the community, or so everyone thought. I was a Moreau, but I was also just a girl. In the world my father and uncles inhabited, a world of blueprints, concrete, and backroom deals, that meant my role was predetermined. I was to be a pleasant accessory, a testament to the family's good breeding. I was expected to be smart, but not ambitious, successful, but in a way that wouldn't overshadow the men. Becoming a teacher, and eventually the principal of Harmony Creek High, fit their narrative perfectly. It was respectable, nurturing, and most importantly, contained. It was a nice little career for Danielle, as I once overheard Uncle Leo say at a barbecue, his voice thick with condescension. They couldn't conceive that my work was my passion, my life's calling. To them, my office at the school was just a prettier, more socially acceptable version of a corner office they might have bestowed upon a favored secretary. They didn't see the lives I was shaping, the community I was building within those brick walls. They just saw their daughter, their niece, playing house in a way that brought a certain reflected glory to the Moreau name, without ever threatening their dominance of it. The real heir apparent was my cousin Rick, Uncle Leo's son. Rick had the right last name and the right gender, and that was about it. He was a shadow of his father, possessing all of the entitlement and none of the drive. He'd skated through school and had been given a fancy title at Moreau Construction, where he spent most of his time extending his lunch breaks and making costly mistakes that my father and uncles would quietly clean up. I remember my own high school graduation like it was yesterday. I was the valedictorian. I had poured my soul into that speech, a message about building bridges not of steel and concrete, but of understanding. After the ceremony, my father hugged me, his praise brief and distracted. A moment later, he was clapping Rick on the back, booming with pride. A B- average in shop class. That's my boy. Got sawdust in his veins, this one. Rick had nearly failed the class, but in my father's eyes, his mediocre effort in a man's world was infinitely more valuable than my excellence in the world of ideas. I smiled, the familiar sting of being politely dismissed settling in my chest. That was the Moreau way. The men built things. The women were expected to simply admire them. This dynamic played out over and over. When I was accepted into my master's program for educational leadership, my Uncle Frank patted my hand and said, "Well, isn't that nice? Just don't get so many degrees that no man will want to marry you." When I was appointed principal, a position I had worked for with relentless dedication for 15 years, Uncle Leo's congratulations came in the form of a joke at Christmas dinner. "Principal Moreau, sounds important. Now you can make sure all the Moreau kids get good grades and stay out of detention, eh? The laughter around the table was a familiar chorus. They saw my power, my authority, as a tool for the family's convenience, not as something I had earned on my own merit. My world, the world of education and ethics and shaping young minds, was a quaint sideshow to their grand theater of commerce. But their theater was starting to crumble. The world had changed, but Moreau construction hadn't. My father and uncles, who had always operated on instinct and reputation, were outmaneuvered by modern regulations, competitive bidding processes, and a market that no longer ran on handshakes alone. Their decisions became more reckless, their investments more desperate. Rick's incompetence, once a minor annoyance, became a gaping wound in the company's finances, bleeding them dry with a series of mismanaged projects. The whispers started quietly at first, then grew louder. Rumors of unpaid suppliers, of cutting corners, of a company leveraged to its breaking point. The Moreau name, once a synonym for stability, was now associated with a hushed, anxious uncertainty. The coat I had been forced to wear was becoming frayed and stained, and I found myself pulling my own professionally tailored blazer tighter around me, trying to separate myself from their decay. The crisis came to a head on a gray, drizzly Sunday. The weekly family dinner, once a loud, boisterous affair, had become a tense, somber ritual. The air in my father's house, a house built by my grandfather's hands, was thick with the smell of dust and desperation. We sat around the heavy oak dining table, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. My father, Arthur, stared at his plate, the food untouched. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his usual commanding presence shrunken and brittle. Uncle Leo was agitated, drumming his fingers on the table, while Uncle Frank just looked tired, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Rick was conspicuously absent, supposedly out of town on business, a phrase that had become a family euphemism for hiding from the latest mess he'd created. My aunt, Leo's wife Sarah, tried to fill the silence with nervous chatter about the church bake sale, but her words just hung in the air and died. Finally, my father cleared his throat. The sound was like a rock slide in the quiet room. "The bank called," he said, his voice a low rasp. "They're not extending the line of credit. We're out of options." Uncle Leo slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "Those vultures, after everything we've done for this town, they should be begging to give us money." My father just shook his head, looking older than I had ever seen him. "It's over, Leo. The business. It's gone." A heavy, suffocating finality settled over the room. This wasn't just a financial loss. It was an existential crisis. Without Moreau Construction, who were they? The pillars of the community were crumbling into dust. I felt a pang of genuine sorrow for them, for the legacy my grandfather had built. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I said softly. "Is there anything I can do? Maybe I could help you look over the books, see if there's a way to restructure." My father looked up at me, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was calculation. "Maybe there is something, Danielle," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority. "Maybe there is." The way he said it sent a small, cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't the tone of a father asking his daughter for help. It was the tone of a king plotting his last, desperate move, looking at the one piece on the board he hadn't yet sacrificed. The meal ended shortly after, the unspoken plan hanging in the air between us, as thick and cloying as the humidity of the coming storm. I drove home with a sense of dread so profound it felt like a physical weight in my stomach. The king was falling, and I had a terrible feeling he was planning to pull me down with him. The other shoe dropped the next day. My father didn't call. He showed up at my office at the high school, a place he had visited maybe twice in my entire career. It was my sanctuary, my domain. The walls were covered in student art, photos of championship debate teams, and letters of acceptance from colleges all over the country. My desk was a controlled chaos of paperwork, schedules, and a single chipped mug that said "World's Best Principal," a gift from the student council. His presence in that space felt like a violation, like a wolf walking into a library. He looked out of place in his expensive but slightly worn suit, a relic. From a time when his name opened every door. He bypassed my secretary with a dismissive wave and walked right in, closing the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. "Danielle," he began, his voice attempting a warmth that didn't reach his eyes. He sat in one of the chairs reserved for nervous students or concerned parents, and the sight of him, so large and yet so diminished in that small chair, was deeply unsettling. "We need to talk. About the family." I leaned back in my own chair, the worn leather a familiar comfort, and folded my hands on my desk. I felt the need to create a barrier, however small. "I figured we did," I said, keeping my voice even. "I was thinking last night, maybe a good bankruptcy lawyer could help." He cut me off with a sharp gesture. "No lawyers. No bankruptcy. That's an admission of failure. Moreau men don't fail." His eyes scanned my office, not with interest, but as if he were assessing its value, its utility. "You've done well for yourself here, Danielle. You're respected. People trust you, the principal." It sounds so unimpeachable. He said the word unimpeachable like it was a foreign delicacy he was tasting for the first time. I didn't like where this was going. "Dad, what do you want?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The town council is launching a new initiative, the Harmony Creek Revitalization Fund. It's a community-backed loan program to support local businesses and spur development. They're putting together an advisory board to review the applications." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Tom Henderson, the mayor, he called me this morning, as a courtesy. He said they'd be honored if you would sit on the board, a non-voting position, of course, just to provide a moral compass," he said. "An educator's perspective." My heart sank. I knew Mayor Henderson. He was a good man who believed in the power of community. And he believed in me. "They want you, Danielle," my father continued, his eyes gleaming with that same calculating light I had seen at dinner. "Your reputation is sterling, untouchable. If you vouch for an applicant, the board will listen. They'll see it as a stamp of approval from the most trusted person in town." He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into dark water. "Moreau Construction is going to apply for a loan, a substantial one. We've drafted a proposal, a new housing development on the old mill property. We'll call it Moreau Meadows." The name was so ridiculously wholesome it was sickening. The old mill property was a brownfield site, environmentally unstable and years away from being viable for any kind of construction. A proposal for it would be pure fiction. "Dad, that's not a real project," I stammered, my mind reeling. "The company is insolvent. The application would be based on lies. That's fraud." "It's not fraud," he snapped, his voice hardening. "It's a lifeline. It's creative financing. We get the loan, we pay off our debts, we stabilize the company, and then we make the project happen. Eventually. But to get the loan, we need a champion. We need you." He stood up and began to pace the small space in front of my desk, his movements caged and predatory. "All you have to do is accept the position on the board. You'll review our application, you'll stand up in the meeting, and you'll tell them that you've seen the plans, that you believe in the project, and that you know your family will make this town proud. You'll use that reputation of yours to do what's right for this family." The audacity of it stole my breath. He wasn't just asking me to lie. He was asking me to weaponize the very thing I had built for myself, piece by piece, outside of his shadow. My integrity wasn't a virtue to him. It was a tool, an asset to be leveraged for his own salvation. "No," I said, the word coming out as a choked whisper. "Absolutely not. I can't do that." His face darkened, the mask of paternal warmth dissolving into raw, ugly anger. "Can't or won't. Don't you forget, young lady, who you are. You're a Moreau. You owe this family. We gave you everything. The name, the comfortable life that allowed you to go off and get your little degrees and play your little games as a principal." He leaned over my desk, his hands planted flat, his face inches from mine. "Your mother," he hissed. "God rest her soul. She would be ashamed of you right now. She believed in family above all else. She would do whatever it took." Using her memory against me was a low blow, and we both knew it. It was his nuclear option. I won't do it, I said, my voice shaking but firm. What you're asking is illegal, and it's wrong. It would destroy my career and betray the trust of this entire town. He straightened.
Up, his eyes cold as ice. Then you will be the one who destroys this family. Not me. Not your uncles. You. And I will make sure everyone in this town knows it. I will tell them that we came to you, our own flesh and blood, in our darkest hour, and you turned your back on us. You, with your cushy job and your sterling reputation, were too proud, too selfish to help. We'll be ruined, but you'll be the villain of the story. The bad daughter who let her own family sink. Let's see how long that sterling reputation of yours lasts after that. He turned and walked out, not bothering to close the door. I sat there, trembling, the air in my own office suddenly feeling thin and unbreathable. He had laid out the terms of my surrender, my integrity, or my name. And he would make sure that if I chose one, I would lose the other. The pressure didn't stop with my father's theatrical exit. It became a coordinated campaign, a siege on my conscience. The next evening, the phone rang. It was Uncle Leo. His tone was a stark contrast to my father's cold fury. It was hot, aggressive, and laced with a bully's entitlement. Danielle, your father told me about your little chat. I have to say, I'm disappointed. Deeply disappointed. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, probably pacing in his oversized living room. What's the matter with you? Do you have any idea what's at stake here? This isn't just about money. This is about our name, my name, your name, everything your grandfather built. Uncle Leo, what you're asking me to do is illegal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, professional, as if I were dealing with an irate parent and not a man who used to bounce me on his knee. He scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. Illegal? Don't be so dramatic, it's just playing the game. It's how the world works. Or did they not teach you that in your fancy principal school? We're just asking you to show a little loyalty, a little gratitude. His voice dropped, becoming menacing. You think you're separate from us? You think that Principal Moreau title protects you? It doesn't. You're one of us. And if we go down, you think people are going to keep respecting you? They'll whisper behind your back. There's Danielle Moreau. Her family lost everything, and she didn't lift a finger to help. Don't be the one who let this family die, Danielle. Don't be that person. Because we will make sure everyone knows the story. Your story will be that of a traitor. He hung up before I could respond, leaving the threat hanging in the silence of my kitchen. 2 days later, it was Uncle Frank's turn. He was the good cop. He showed up at my doorstep with a peace offering, a lemon meringue pie from the town bakery, my favorite since I was a little girl. He looked genuinely pained, his gentle face etched with worry. He was the uncle I had always felt closest to, the one who'd seemed to have a kinder, softer heart. Danny, can I come in for a minute? He asked, his voice soft. I let him in, my guard still up. We sat at my small kitchen table, the pie sitting between us like a sugary bomb. Your father and Leo, they're not handling this well. He started wringing his hands. They're scared. We're all scared. We're about to lose everything we've ever worked for. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I know what they're asking is a lot. It's not right, not really. But Danny, think about it from our side. This business is all we have. It's all we are. Arthur sees it as his legacy. Leo sees it as his son's future. For me, it's just my life. It's all I've ever done. He reached across the table and touched my hand. His was rough and calloused from a lifetime of work. We're not bad people, Danny. We're just desperate. Can't you find it in your heart to bend a little? Just this once? For the family. For me. His approach was almost worse than Leo's aggression. It was a direct appeal to my love, my history, my empathy. He was asking me to poison myself, but he was doing it with such sorrowful sincerity that it felt like an act of mercy. I spent that night sleepless, tossing and turning, the voices of the 3 Moreau men echoing in my head. My father's threat, my Uncle Leo's rage, my Uncle Frank's desperate plea. They were a 3-headed monster, each attacking me from a different angle. I found myself wandering through my own house, picking up old photo albums. There I was, a gap-toothed 7-year-old, sitting on my grandfather's lap next to a half-finished brick wall. He was showing me how to lay mortar. He always smelled of cement dust and integrity. Then another photo, me at 16, holding a science fair trophy, standing awkwardly next to my father and Rick, who was holding a dusty football. My father's arm was proudly around Rick's shoulders. His hand was barely touching my arm, an afterthought. Page after page, it was the same story. I was present. I was loved in a generic, obligatory way. But I was never the point. The point was the business, the name, the sons who would carry it on. My achievements were decorations on their walls, not foundations of my own. The next morning, I felt hollowed out, exhausted. I went to school on autopilot, the familiar routine the only thing keeping me upright. In the staff lounge, I saw Margaret, a history teacher who was just a few years from retirement. She'd been at Harmony Creek High for 40 years, and she had a way of seeing through nonsense that was both terrifying and comforting. She saw the look on my face and steered me into her classroom during her free period, closing the door and handing me a cup of lukewarm coffee. "All right, Danielle," she said, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You look like you've been wrestling with demons. And judging by the look of you, the demons are winning." I didn't plan to tell her everything, but it all just came pouring out. The failing business, the revitalization fund, the fraudulent proposal, the pressure, the threats, the emotional blackmail. I told her everything, my voice cracking. When I finished, I just sat there, depleted. Margaret was quiet for a long time, looking at the portrait of Abraham Lincoln on her wall. "They're giving you 2 options," she said finally, her voice calm and analytical. "Option A, you commit a crime, sacrifice your integrity, and save their business. Option B, you refuse, maintain your integrity, and they publicly brand you as a villain who betrayed her family." I nodded numbly. "That's about the size of it." "And you think those are the only 2 options?" she asked, turning to look at me directly. Her gaze was intense. "You're the principal of this school, Danielle. You deal with complex problems every day. You mediate conflicts. You find creative solutions. Why are you letting them define the terms of this battle?" I stared at her, confused. "What other option is there?" She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "They're threatening to control the narrative, to tell their version of the story to the whole town. A quiet no from you gives them a blank canvas to paint you as the bad guy. So what happens if you're the one who tells the story first? What happens if you seize the narrative? Who gets to tell your story, Danielle? Them or you?" Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A third option, not A or B. A brand new path, one I had to carve myself. The idea was terrifying. It was audacious. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff preparing to jump. But for the first time in days, it also felt like hope. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, something I hadn't felt since my father walked out of my office. A spark of rebellion. I left Margaret's classroom with her question echoing in my mind. Who gets to tell my story? The answer was starting to become clear. It had to be me. That night, I didn't sleep, but it wasn't the tormented, restless tossing of the nights before. It was a night of furious energy, of a mind on fire. Margaret's question had unlocked something in me. A part of myself I had kept dormant for years. The part that had fought for the valedictorian speech, for the master's degree, for the principal's office. It was the part of me that refused to be an accessory. Lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the plan began to form. It was a wild, high-wire act, a gamble of such epic proportions that it made my heart pound with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to take their private, ugly little conspiracy and drag it into the brightest, most public light imaginable. The idea of a town hall meeting was the cornerstone. They wanted to use my reputation in the town? Fine. I would use it myself, on my own terms. I got out of bed, went to my study, and turned on my computer. I started drafting.
Not a letter of refusal, not a legal statement. I started designing a flyer. At the top, in a bold, welcoming font, I wrote, "A community support initiative." Below it, in smaller type, "Join Principal Danielle Moreau for a vital town hall discussion on protecting our community's financial health and integrity." I listed a date and time, 1 week from today, at the Harmony Creek Town Hall Auditorium. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. It was completely true, and yet it revealed nothing. The next day, I felt a strange sense of dual reality. I went through my day at school, a calm and capable principal on the surface, while inside, a revolutionary was planning a coup. I called the town clerk and booked the auditorium. "It's for a community initiative," I explained, my voice smooth and professional. "Focusing on financial literacy and ethics. I think it's something our town really needs right now." The clerk was delighted. "What a wonderful idea, Principal Moreau. You're always thinking of the community." Her words were like fuel on the fire of my resolve. This was my community. These were the people my family was willing to defraud. The hardest part was preparing for what I had to do. I spent hours each evening in my empty living room practicing the speech. At first, my voice was a reedy, trembling thing. The words felt too big, too dangerous to say out loud. "My name is Danielle Moreau, and my family is in trouble." I would say it to my reflection in the dark window, and the woman staring back looked terrified. But I kept going. I wrote and rewrote, honing each sentence. I practiced the part where I would have to confess their plot, the part that would detonate a bomb in the middle of my life. I imagined their faces in the front row. My father's shock, Uncle Leo's apoplectic rage, Uncle Frank's wounded animal betrayal. The thought made me feel physically ill. One evening, I almost lost my nerve. The weight of it all became too much. The potential consequences crashed down on me. I could be fired. I could be ostracized. I could lose everything. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the town clerk's office, my thumb hovering over the call button. I could cancel. I could just say no quietly, take the public shaming, and try to ride it out. It would be easier, safer. But then I looked at the flyer I had printed out, sitting on my desk. Protecting our community's financial health and integrity. It wasn't just about my integrity anymore. It was about theirs. It was about protecting the trusting, good-hearted people of Harmony Creek from predators who happened to share my DNA. I put the phone down. The moment of doubt passed, and what replaced it was a cold, hard certainty. This was the only way. I dove into the work with renewed vigor. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to follow through on the promise of my flyer. I spent hours researching common types of fraud, especially affinity fraud, the very kind they were asking me to help them commit, where a con artist uses a shared identity or affiliation to fleece a community. I created pamphlets, simple, easy-to-read one-sheets with titles like "Know the Red Flags" and "How to Vet a Business Proposal." I was preparing a real seminar. This wouldn't be a simple act of revenge. It would be an act of public service. It would be an act of a principal, an educator, protecting her flock. The call I was both dreading and anticipating came 3 days before the meeting. It was my father. His voice was laced with a smug, triumphant relief. "Danielle, I saw your flyer. Community Support Initiative. Very clever. Very diplomatic. I'm glad you came to your senses, sweetheart. It's the right thing to do, the only thing to do." My blood ran cold. He actually thought the meeting was for him. He thought I was going to stand up in front of the entire town and endorse his fraudulent scheme under the guise of a community event. The dramatic irony was so thick I could barely breathe. "Your uncles and I will be there," he continued, his voice booming with renewed confidence. "Front row, cheering you on. We're so proud of you, Danielle. You're a true Moreau, through and through." I murmured something noncommittal, my throat tight. "I have to go, Dad." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. They were going to walk into that town hall expecting a coronation. They had no idea they were walking into an execution. The day of the town hall meeting, a strange calm settled over me. The nervous energy had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. I got dressed with methodical care, choosing a simple dark blue dress and my most professional blazer. I was armoring myself. Before I left, I got a text from Margaret. It just said, The truth has its own strength. You've got this. I took a deep breath and walked out the door. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The Harmony Creek Town Hall Auditorium was exactly as I remembered it from 1,000 school plays and civic events. It smelled of floor wax, old wood, and freshly brewed coffee. The room was packed. I saw the faces of my neighbors, my students' parents, local business owners, the fire chief, my favorite librarian from the public library, even the mayor, Tom Henderson, who gave me a warm, encouraging nod. They had come because they trusted me. The weight of that trust felt heavier than ever, but today it wasn't a burden. It was my shield. And then I saw them, my family. They were right where my father had promised they would be, in the center of the front row. My father, Arthur, was beaming, looking every inch the proud patriarch. Uncle Leo was next to him, a smug grin plastered on his face, already looking like a man who had dodged a bullet. Uncle Frank looked relieved, a genuine, hopeful smile on his face. My cousin Rick was even there, looking bored but expectant, probably already planning how he'd spend the money. They looked at me as I walked towards the stage and gave me a collective thumbs up. The sight of their complete, blissful ignorance was so grotesque it almost made me laugh. They had no idea. They saw me as their pawn, about to make the winning move on their behalf. They couldn't see that I had flipped the entire board over. I stepped up to the podium. My hands were ice cold, but my voice, when I tested it, was steady. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I started with the pleasantries, the standard welcome. I thanked them for their commitment to our town. I could feel my father's proud gaze on me like a physical touch. I took a sip of water, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The point of no return. I looked out at the sea of familiar faces, the people of Harmony Creek, my people, and I took the leap. I called this meeting tonight under the official banner of a community support initiative. I began, my voice clear and ringing through the silent auditorium. And we will get to that. But first, I have a confession to make. I also called this meeting under a pretense. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw the smile on my father's face falter, replaced by a look of slight confusion. He thought this was part of the act. The truth is, I continued, my eyes locking onto his, I called you all here tonight because I was in trouble, and I needed your help. Not with money or with support, but with a decision that went to the very core of what it means to be a member of this community. I took a deep breath. As many of you know, the Moreau family business, a company that has been a part of this town for a century, is in dire financial trouble. It is on the verge of collapse. Gasps echoed around the room. This was not a secret, but to have it stated so baldly, so publicly by a Moreau, was a shock. I watched the color drain from my father's face. His smile was completely gone now, replaced by a mask of dawning horror. Uncle Leo's smug grin had vanished, his jaw slack with disbelief. Because of this desperation, I went on, my voice gaining strength with every word, my father, Arthur Moreau, and my uncles, Leo and Frank Moreau, came to me with a proposition, a way out. They asked me to use my position as principal, and the reputation I have built with all of you, to secure a fraudulent loan from the new Harmony Creek Revitalization Fund. The gasp this time was sharp, collective, and angry. The murmuring grew louder. I held up a hand for silence. They drafted a fictitious business plan for a property they knew was unviable. They asked me to accept a position on the advisory board and to lie. They wanted me to tell the board, and by extension all of you, that their plan was sound, that their company was trustworthy, and that they were a good investment for this town's hard-earned money. They wanted me to betray your trust, to commit a crime, to help them steal from the very community our family was supposed to have helped build. Now, I looked directly at my family. My father was white as a sheet, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Uncle Frank looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his face a mess of shame and shock. Uncle Leo, however, was turning a dangerous shade of purple. The disbelief had curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. They threatened me, I said, my voice dropping but still carrying to every corner of the room. They told me that if I refused, they would paint me as a villain, a bad daughter who abandoned her family in their time of need. They were going to destroy my name to save their own.
and I realized they left me with no good options, so I decided to make my own. That was the breaking point. "She's lying!" My father's voice, a raw, desperate roar, ripped through the auditorium. He staggered to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's hysterical! She's twisting everything! We would never—" But his words trailed off, because everyone in the room could see the truth in his panicked eyes. Uncle Leo was on his feet too, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "How dare you! You ungrateful little—" Before he could finish, Mayor Henderson stood up from his seat in the second row. His voice wasn't loud, but it
cut through the chaos with absolute authority. "Sit down, Arthur. You too, Leo. This is a town meeting, not a family squabble. Let her speak." The two men, stunned by the public rebuke from the mayor, hesitated and then slowly, awkwardly, sank back into their chairs, their faces a thunderous portrait of humiliation. The entire town was watching them, their gazes a mixture of pity and contempt. They were utterly, completely checkmated. I took a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I turned to the whiteboard I had set up on the stage. I picked up a dry erase marker, the click of the cap loud in the still room. "And what my family asked me to do," I said, my voice now calm, professorial, and in complete control, "is a textbook example of a tactic called affinity fraud. It's one of the most dangerous kinds of financial scams because it preys on trust and shared community. So, for the rest of our time tonight, I'd like to begin the Real Community Support Initiative. Let's talk about financial ethics. Let's talk about how we, as a community, can protect ourselves, our savings, and our town's future from this kind of predatory behavior." I uncapped the marker and wrote in big, clear letters at the top of the whiteboard, "Affinity fraud, know the red flags." The seminar had begun. The rest of the meeting was surreal. I delivered the seminar I had prepared using a hypothetical case study that mirrored my family's scheme in every detail, never once looking in their direction. The people of Harmony Creek were completely riveted. They listened with an intensity I had never seen before. They asked intelligent, pointed questions. They took the pamphlets I had printed. I wasn't just a principal anymore. I was a protector, arming my community with knowledge, turning a moment of personal crisis into a lesson in collective strength. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a standing ovation, a roar of support and gratitude that washed over me, cleansing the filth of my family's demands. As the crowd began to disperse, I saw my family scurry out a side exit, their heads bowed, avoiding all eye contact. They looked like ghosts, their power and influence evaporated in the space of an hour. They hadn't just been exposed, they had been rendered irrelevant. A line of people formed in front of the stage, not to accuse or question, but to thank me. An elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, who had been a victim of a home repair scam years ago, clutched my hand, tears in her eyes. "You're a hero, Danielle," she whispered. A young couple who ran the new coffee shop told me they had been planning to apply to the fund, and they thanked me for ensuring it would be a fair process. Then, Mayor Tom Henderson made his way to the stage. He shook my hand, his grip firm and his eyes full of respect. "Danielle," he said, his voice low and serious, "that took more courage than anything I've ever seen in this town hall. You did the right thing, the hard thing." He gestured toward the now empty front row. "What they asked of you was a disgrace, but what you did tonight, you may have just saved the soul of this town." He paused. "The revitalization fund is obviously on hold. It needs a new charter, new rules, transparent ones. I'd like you to be on the committee to write it. In fact, I'd like you to chair it." I was floored. In one night, I had gone from being the target of a conspiracy to the guardian of the town's integrity. "I'd be honored, Mayor," I managed to say. I drove home in a daze, the applause still ringing in my ears. When I walked into my quiet house, the red light on my answering machine was blinking furiously. I pressed play. It was a string of voicemails, each one more unhinged than the last. First Uncle Leo, his voice a guttural snarl of curses and threats. Then Uncle Frank, sobbing, calling me a traitor who had destroyed them. Finally, my father, His voice wasn't angry or sad. It was chillingly empty. "You are no longer my daughter," he said, and the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, then calmly pressed the delete button, erasing all of them. I walked to my phone, opened my contacts, found the entry for Dad, and deliberately, precisely edited it. The screen now read, "Arthur." The severing was complete. The next day at school was a revelation. As I walked down the main hall, students gave me quiet smiles and nods of respect. Teachers greeted me with a new warmth. During the morning break, when I entered the staff room, the conversation stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was condemnation. Then, Margaret started to clap. Slowly, one by one, the entire faculty got to their feet and gave me a standing ovation. It wasn't loud or boisterous like the one in the town hall. It was quiet, solid, and deeply moving. This was my family, the one I had chosen, the one I had built. They had seen my battle, and they were standing with me. That afternoon, a small handwritten card appeared on my desk. It was from a quiet sophomore I'd been mentoring. It just said, "Thank you for teaching us what integrity looks like, Principal Moreau." I held that card in my hands, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right choice. 6 months passed, the seasons changed, and so did the landscape of Harmony Creek. The large, proud Moreau construction sign at the edge of town was taken down, leaving a faded patch on the brick wall behind it. The company had been dismantled, its assets sold off to pay a fraction of its debts. Uncle Leo and his family, including Rick, moved away, unable to bear the shame. Uncle Frank took a job with a rival company in the next county, a humbled, quieter man. And my father, Arthur, became a ghost in his own town. He sold the large family home and moved into a small rented apartment. I'd see him sometimes at the grocery store, looking smaller, older, a king without a kingdom. The Harmony Creek Revitalization Fund, under the new charter my committee and I had written, launched its first initiative. The first loan was granted not to a developer, but to a brilliant young baker, a former student of mine, who had a dream of opening an artisanal bread shop on Main Street. The day of her grand opening, the whole town turned out. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, a scent of new beginnings. It was a tangible symbol of the town's new direction, one built on genuine promise, not on the hollow legacy of a fallen name. A few days after that, I found a letter in my office mailbox. The handwriting was my father's, but it was shaky, uncertain. I opened it with trepidation. It wasn't an apology, not directly. It was a rambling, disjointed account of his life, of how the business had become his entire identity. "The business was all I had," he wrote. "I didn't know who I was without it. When it started to die, I felt like I was dying. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. You built something real, Danielle, something strong. I just built things out of wood and stone. You built character. I was a builder who didn't know the first thing about a solid foundation." A week later, he showed up at the school, asking my secretary if I had a moment. He stood in my office in the same spot he had stood 6 months earlier when he had threatened me, but he was a different man. The anger and entitlement were gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "The bread at that new bakery is very good," he said quietly. "She's a good kid. You did a good thing, helping her." I nodded. "She did the work, Arthur. She earned it." We stood in silence for a moment. "I'm sorry, Danielle," he finally said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue. "For everything." It wasn't a perfect apology. It couldn't erase years of dismissal or the ugliness of his threats, but it was a start. It was a crack of light in a dark room. I looked at the man before me, not my father the patriarch, but Arthur, a flawed, broken man trying to find his way. "I know," I said. And in that moment, I let go of the last of my anger, not for him, but for me. I set a new boundary, not of anger, but of clarity. "I can love you, Arthur, but I will never again be your safety net. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be built on something new, something honest." He just nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. It was a fragile, uncertain piece, but it was real. Looking back,
I realized that the Moreau legacy I had spent my whole life trying to live up to was a phantom. The real legacy wasn't in the buildings Moreau construction had erected. It was in the trust I had refused to break. It was in the community I had fought to protect. My family's name used to be everything to me, a heavy coat I was forced to wear. But that night, in front of everyone, I took it off. I stood there in my own skin, defined not by my bloodline, but by my choices. I learned that your name isn't what people call you. It's what you answer to. So that's my story. It's a reminder that your value isn't determined by your family, your last name, or the role others expect you to play. It's determined by your own integrity, your own choices, and your own courage. I'd love to hear from you all in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between loyalty to others and loyalty to yourself? Share your story, because every voice adds to our collective strength. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your own power. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember that true family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood. And sometimes the most important thing you can build is a boundary.